The microphone's right at the table. Where is it?
Nice.
So I just speak normally?
Yeah, speak normally ahead, and yeah.
Okay. And is it picking up? Can you hear me? No?
Let's try it a different way.
So these are just, what are these for?
Those are pointed out to the audience, so when they ask questions,
Oh, gotcha.
and for Marlene to make her introduction. So, yeah.
Maybe it's because there's a lot of background noise?
That could be, yeah. In the meantime, though, I don't want to ask you that. Let's see if there's a way we can boost this up. It really isn't. So, I'll check something out real quick.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. He's checking the microphones, so. Sure. I mean, I don't even know if I need a microphone, to be honest. It's a pretty small crowd.
No, that's a good point. Once it gets down, volume and the doors are closed, it'll be. If you need to project, of course, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay.
We'll see.
Okay. Sounds good. Ruchi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. I'm actually going to get
I should, but I don't really see very many people.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Marlene Whitman, and I'm here from the Chi Lifers, and we're so glad that you're here today. So I'm thinking of my favorite rabbi always says, oh, I have a big treat in store for you today when she's really excited about a presentation, and those words are rolling off my tongue right now too. We have a big treat today that Ruki Kaval is here, and so many of you as you walked in told me your personal connection, and that's really neat, and that's really what today is about. Ruki is from JFX. She's one of the founders and co-directors with her husband, Rabbi Kaval, and some of you are in her congregation and part of that. And I know I read her column in the Jewish News, and I read her blog, and I watch her video blog, and so I don't know if that makes me a groupie. It does. I'm a groupie, and just so many different connections. She's one of the 18 difference makers from the CJN, and we even had someone signed up here today who went on a trip to Israel with her group called Momentum. So Ruki is an author. She has her book, Soul Construction, and there's someone in the audience who's in the book. So lots and lots of connections, and I told Ruki that my favorite story, I was going to prompt her so she would have to tell my favorite story that I have here, my giving plate, and Ruki had, I think, a blog recently where she spoke about her mom and how her mom, in essence, uses a giving plate and shares her great cooking skill with others, and I'll let Ruki take the story from me here, how Ruki thought about that in terms of herself, and she always has a very uplifting message, and I'm so proud that we have her here today with us. So Ruki Kaval.
Okay, hi everybody. It's nice to see you. I think I'm going to stand instead of sit because, I don't know, can everybody see me? No. Not so much, right? Okay. All right, so the truth is you can't really keep me still for long because I kind of tend to like walk all over the place, so I'll just keep moving. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you everybody for coming out here today. And I really think it's appropriate that I want to talk about connecting the dots today and about when we all look back on our lives, we all have stories to tell, you know? We all have things that happen to us, and we also have things that, if not for that, well, that wouldn't have happened. And if not for that, I wouldn't have met that person or had that experience. And this past Shabbat, yesterday, in synagogues, we had the service of the blessing of Rosh Chodesh. So every month, the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh, which is the beginning of the new Jewish month, we have something at synagogue called Birkat HaChodesh, the blessing of the new month. And we say prayers and blessings for the upcoming new Jewish month, praying that it be a good month, a happy month, a blessed month, a month of good things and good news. And the Rosh Chodesh, the new Jewish month that's coming up this week, is Adar. And Adar is the month of happiness. The Talmud says, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. As the month of Adar comes in, we expand our joy. And Adar is the month of Purim. Actually, this year is an anomaly because it's a Jewish leap year. So we have two Adars. So Purim is not actually going to be this month, but rather next month. But nevertheless, we're still in the spirit of Adar. We're in the spirit of Purim. So on Purim, we read the Megillah. We read the story of Queen Esther and Mordechai and how they saved the Jewish people. And the Hebrew words for the scroll of Esther is Megillat Esther, the Megillah of Esther. But those words have another hidden meaning. Megillat Esther literally means the revelation of that which is hidden. Megillat means to reveal, and Esther means hidden. And so the scroll, the story of Esther, reveals that which is hidden. If you go to synagogue on Purim and you listen to the story of the Megillah, it takes, I don't know, half hour, 40 minutes to read, you know, depending on how long the kids are making noise for Haman and, you know, how long everyone has to wait for them to be quiet. So how long does it take? It doesn't take very long. And you hear this story and you're like, oh, of course. Queen Esther had to be taken to the palace, and then there she was positioned, and when Haman, the evil, hateful, anti-Semitic dictator commands genocide against all the Jews, there she is, like perfectly positioned to petition the king and save the Jews. But it's really not that obvious, because even though we're hearing the story in like a half hour, 45 minutes, actually the story took 11 to 14 years, depending on when you decide the story started. So the Jewish people who were living at the time, it didn't seem obvious at all. They spent years feeling scared and confused and persecuted and terrorized before the revelation of the hidden began. And that's really the message to all of us, which is when we're in a situation, as we are right now, as a Jewish people, in our place in history right now, it's so easy to feel scared and confused and persecuted. And when is this going to end? Some of you asked me about my necklace. This is a necklace to remember the hostages. And it says here in Hebrew, Halev shalanu shavoi ba'aza, my heart is kept captive in Gaza. And at the bottom it says, bring them home now. And on the other side it says, biyachad ninatzeach, together we will succeed. And then this is my necklace of Israel, which my nephew asked me, what is this? I said, are you kidding me? This is the place that all Jews love. He goes, oh, Florida. So we had a little education to do. But I wear these necklaces every day, and we are in a position in Jewish history where we don't know what's going to happen. We're living the story. The end of the story has not yet been revealed to us. But another message of Megillat Esther, of the revelation of that which is hidden, is that every person has their own Megillah, right? Every person has their own scroll, their own story, the stories that happen to us, the things that we write on our heart. And a person could live their Megillah their whole life and never connect the dots. Never look back and say, oh, that happened over 11 years, but now looking back, I feel like I can make sense of it. Or maybe I can understand why this or that had to happen to me. And it's incumbent on all of us to do this, to look back and to connect the dots and to try to make sense of our own personal stories, to find the meaning in what might seem to be meaningless. And some of you have mentioned reading my column in the Jewish News, and that's really what I try to do in my column, is I try to pull meaning out of my life and to try to connect the dots and make sense of things that have happened to me. And so I'd like to just start a little bit. Love this plate. Love the story of this plate. And I have a beautiful bowl that, this is actually not from my mother, but from my grandfather, my mother's father of blessed memory. And he used to have a sign in his house that said it in Yiddish. Anybody here speak Yiddish? Im mir kenish haben, was du wilt. Anyone know what that means? If you can't have what you want, as mir darf willen, it doesn't matter if I make a mistake because you guys don't even know. Okay. As mir darf willen, was mir hat. Then I have to want what I have. If I can't have what I want, then I have to want what I have. Right? And it's a bowl. It's a bowl. Why? Because you get to decide what you're going to fill up your bowl with. Fill up your bowl with the things that you want. And the things that you have need to become the things that you want. And that's why it's so important for us to go back and look at our lives and unwrap our scrolls and find the meaning and find the purpose and find, yes, the hope and the optimism in what's going on. So what I'd like to do is to just tell you guys my story, just my personal memoir in 45 minutes, and just pull out some of the life lessons that I have discovered about the things that have happened to me in my life and how I have found meaning and made sense of those things. And some of you here know me for a long time, and you may have heard some of my stories, and some of you may have never heard any of these stories. But my stories are not unique. All of you have these stories. We just have to look back and discover them and find them and make the sense of them. So I was born in 1974 in Albert Einstein Hospital in New York to a religious Orthodox family. 3 of my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. 2 of them are gone now. 3 of my grandparents are gone now. I have 1 grandmother still alive who was in Auschwitz. And I grew up very much under the shadow of the Holocaust. And that's one of the reasons why I was not surprised on October 7th, because my grandparents always told me it could happen again. And I resented them for saying that, because we were growing up in relative peace and security, and I didn't want that message to seep into my happiness. But the truth is that they were right. Anti-Semitism never went away. It just sort of went underground for a little while. And so the Holocaust was a very big part of my history and a very big part of my life, my family, the intergenerational trauma. So much has been written and spoken about this. But I grew up in a very happy home. And then when I was 6 years old, my father got cancer and he died. And it was obviously a very, very sad time for my family. And a year later, my mother got remarried to a man who was here in Cleveland in medical school. He was from Cincinnati. He went to the Telz Yeshiva, the rabbinical school here in Wickliffe, Ohio. Yes, there are Jews in Wickliffe, Ohio. And we moved to Cleveland. Now, we didn't know anybody in Cleveland. Our whole life was in New York. All of our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody lived in New York. And I started school at the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. And as soon as my fellow classmates got wind of the fact that I had a New York accent, they would make me count from 1 to 10 because they thought it was so funny when I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so they made me do it over and over again, which is how I very quickly taught myself to speak like a Midwesterner. And orange, horrible, forest, I got it down pat. I did speech therapy on myself. But I was a pretty resilient kid, and I quickly acclimated. My stepfather came into the marriage with a 4-year-old daughter, so I had come in with 2 brothers. I'd never had a sister, and all of a sudden I had a sister. And I was always like, I want a sister, I want a sister. And then I had a sister, and I'm like, who wants her around? She's cramping my style. And then later, my mother and stepfather together had 3 more kids. So we were kind of like the Brady Bunch minus Alice, which would have been nice. So when we were moving to New York, my mother told me that we were going to be living right next to Carvel. And I was very excited about this, Carvel, kosher ice cream. Except that when we actually got to Cleveland, I learned that she did not say Carvel, but she rather said Koval. We were moving right next to Koval. Now, we lived in Cleveland Heights, Shannon Road. I don't know if you guys know the neighborhood. So we were living at 3703 Shannon Road, and our backyard, and then the Koval's backyard, and then the Koval's. Now, the Koval's were very boring because they had 6 boys. Which I was 7. I thought that was boring. They also had 2 girls, but they were younger. Not very interesting to me. Little did I know that however many years later, I would marry their oldest son. And that's how my name came to be, Koval. But to me, that was just one example of where God sort of moves the pawns around the chessboard and we don't know the strategy. If you've ever watched somebody play chess and you don't know how to play chess, did anybody here watch The Queen's Gambit? Wasn't that good? So I don't happen to be a chess, frankly, it bores me, but it was still really interesting. But if you're watching the game and you don't really understand chess, you're like, what are you doing? I don't understand what you're doing, right? You always have to be 3 steps ahead when you're playing chess. There needs to be a strategy. Well, I'm going to go here so that you can go here. My brother beat me many, many, many times in chess. Maybe that's why I decided I wasn't interested in playing. But that's how I really kind of looked at it, where God was moving the pawns around the chessboard, and for some reason or another, we needed to end up in Cleveland. How are you going to get this family from New York to move to Cleveland? That's how it happened, And God literally, I think I did write a CJN column about this. God literally delivered me on the doorstep of my future husband, which is so ironic and unexpected. And at the moment, again, we moved when I was 7. I got engaged very young, so take a deep breath. I was 18. So 11 years, which is exactly the same amount of time as the Megillah story, depending on how you're counting. It took 11 years for me to make sense of the fact that I was living next to the Kovals and not next to Carvel for a reason. There was a reason. There was a reason that I needed to come to Cleveland. My whole life is in Cleveland. My husband and I started a community here in Cleveland. And we have all this family here in Cleveland. And most of my kids live in Cleveland. And my dearest friends live in Cleveland. And Cleveland ended up really becoming very much our home. And how did I end up in Cleveland? Like, the whole thing doesn't really make so much sense. So that's just one example of connecting the dots, things that may have happened a long time ago. And it doesn't explain, why did my father die when I was 6 years old? I mean, couldn't have God, with his eternal ingenuity, have come up with a better way to get me to Cleveland? Yes. He could have. I don't know God's master plan. But I do believe that I needed to be here for a reason, and I needed to meet the people I met, and I needed to lay the groundwork that I laid in order to build the life that I've built. So my life was pretty good, other than the fact that, my father had passed away. Obviously, that was a very difficult experience for a young child, but we rebuilt our lives. We came to Cleveland. I was in the Hebrew Academy, as I mentioned. I was in a small class. There were 20 of us who graduated. And really, until I was, I would say, about 40 years old, I'm 49 now, a lot of things really went my way. I loved school. I was pretty good at it. I loved to make new friends. I went to camp. I loved camp. I loved to act and sing and dance and swim and, do all of the things and stay up late chatting with my friends. And, like I said, I met my husband at a very young age. And he's such a good man. I've been so blessed. We moved to Israel for a few years. My husband decided that he wanted to become a rabbi. That's another story that I'll tell you about in a second. And I had kids, like, as soon as I wanted them, and they were healthy kids and cute kids. And really, I felt very, very much almost like, was life too good? And not that I believe in a punishing God, I don't. But I do have to overcome that bias sometimes when bad things happen to me, because the first instinct is very often, God is punishing me. And then I have to say to myself, stop it. That's not the God you believe in. You need to override that. But for a while, I was thinking to myself, when is the other shoe going to drop? Because when I looked around at my friends and relatives, it did seem to me like everybody was struggling with something. This one had health issues, and this one, had fertility issues, and this one had marital issues, and there were all kinds of things, and I didn't really understand why I had been spared. So put that on hold. We're living in Israel. This is 1993 to 1998. We lived in Israel. And as I said, we were very young. I was working for a publishing company. My husband was in rabbinical school. And he was on a bus. And this story is in the introduction to my book, Soul Construction. And we were still trying to figure out, what did we want to do when we grew up, right? Because we hadn't grown up yet. So we didn't know. My husband's father, my father-in-law, is in, as he calls it, the shmata business. He's a wholesaler. And so my husband figured when we get back to the States, we would live in Israel, for a couple years, and then he would go into the family business, and that's how things would go. So anyways, we're in Israel, he's on a bus, and he encounters this gentleman, a neighbor of ours, who was a German Jewish Holocaust survivor. And he's sitting on, he kind of recognized him, they were neighbors, and he says to my husband, hey, can I tell you a Devar Torah? Can I share with you a Torah thought? Love these buses in Jerusalem where people say that to you. And my husband says, sure, that would be great. So he tells him this idea that, just as the Torah teaches that a person has a responsibility to give 10% of their income to charity, a person also has a responsibility to give 10% of their time to the community. So my husband's like, wow, that's so beautiful. That's so interesting. I've never heard that before. So he goes, yeah, it's true. He says to my husband, I want to tell you something. He says, my life has been spared 3 times, once from the Nazis and twice from terrorists. Life is short, and I'm going to say it to you straight. What are you going to do for the community? They're kind of direct in Israel. So my husband says, well, I'm in rabbinical school, and we're raising our family. And so he says, are you telling me that you don't have 1 hour a week to give to the community? So my husband comes home, and he tells me this encounter. He repeats the story to me, and he says, he goes, I think I'm going to call Aish HaTorah. Aish HaTorah is an institution in Jerusalem that teaches people who haven't had an extensive Jewish education and want to learn more, teaches them more about Judaism. So he says, I think I'm going to call Aish HaTorah and volunteer for 1 hour a week. I said, oh, that's such a nice idea. That's great. So he does so, and he calls them up, and he says, my name is Shirley Koval, and I'm from Cleveland, and I've had a really strong Jewish education. I speak Hebrew fluently. Is there anybody in your school that needs tutoring? And he says, if there's anybody from the Cleveland area, he says, I would like that if you could, match me up with them. So the person who he was connected to said, actually, we have 2 kids from Cleveland who recently arrived. You guys know Hartley Gross? His 2 sons had just arrived in Israel. So my husband was matched up with these 2, they were kids then, to be their study partner. And he's tutoring them in Hebrew and in their studies and all of this, and they loved it, and he loved it. And they started inviting their friends, and they had a little havurah, like a little group. And then my husband started inviting them over for Shabbat, and they started coming, and it was so nice. My husband, he was like on fire. And one day he comes home and he says, I think this is my calling. I said, what's your calling? He says, I'm going to be a rabbi. I was like, really? Oh, I never pictured myself as a rabbi's wife. That wasn't so much my vibe, And I'm like, and this is the part I read about in the story, I'm like, do I have to be a Rebbitzin? Because I'm not really such a Rebbitzin. He's like, oh no, you do not have to be a Rebbitzin. I'm going to do me, and you're going to do you, and it's going to be fine. And the joke's on me because I'm totally a Rebbitzin. But I thought Rebbitzins were European and old, and I was neither. And I was neither of those things. So I was like, oh no, that's not me. Anyway, that's what launched his career as a rabbi. And years later, when we were back living in Cleveland, I was actually not a Rebbitzin. I was not involved in his work, and I was working with a friend to launch a faith-based parenting magazine. And we were in the middle of writing up a business plan, and my husband invited me to come with him. This was not manipulative at all, he did not know this was going to happen. But he was going to a rabbi's conference over a weekend, and he invited me to come with him to the rabbi's conference. So I was like, oh, that sounds like fun, great. So I go to the conference, and we're going to all these lectures, the whole Shabbat, about, serving the Jewish people and using your talents for the greater good and blah, blah, blah. And on the way home, I said to him, I don't think this is why you brought me here, but I said, I feel like, why should I put my energy into a magazine if I can put my energy into the Jewish people? I said, I want to be, I didn't say Rebbitzin, I said, I want to be your partner. And I want us to do this together. And I want to use what I have to serve the Jewish people. So he's like, yay! So that's how we really came to launch JFX, full-fledged. And we started in 2005. Now, what is JFX? JFX is a congregation, but we're really much more than a congregation. We're a community of learners. And there's many people who are involved in JFX, which stands for the Jewish Family Experience, who are also members at many other temples, some who are not members at other temples, who kind of utilize JFX as a way to plug in and to nourish their souls and to do some learning in addition to what they may be doing in their other temples. But it didn't start as a synagogue at all. It started as a community of learners, and we really try to stay very true to that mission statement. So I told you the story of Koval and Carvel, and that was one, connecting of the dots. And then I told you the story of my husband on the bus with this gentleman who said to him, you need to give 10% of your time to the community. And that was another connecting of the dots, And I sometimes think of this guy, his name was Sender Feuerstein. He was probably in his 80s at the time of this encounter, which happened probably in 1995. And I think sometimes of him, going up to the next world, after a long life, and, God saying to him, wow, Sender, you did good. And he says, I did good? And he says, yeah, look what's going on in Cleveland. And he's like, what's Cleveland? And God is like, well, there's this whole community that's thanks to you. And he's like, thanks to me? Yeah, because you planted a seed, and that seed sprouted, and look what it became. And that's your credit. You launched this idea. You weren't shy to share your inspiration with a fellow Jew, and look what came to pass. And I told you the story of me going to this conference and just feeling the spark and the desire and the need to share what I have with the Jewish people. So here's another story to connect the dots. So at that time, my husband was a male. He still is one. And at that time, he was the only male in Cleveland. When we moved to Cleveland, so after Israel, we lived in Buffalo Grove in the Chicago area for 2 years. That was his first rabbinical position. Then we came to Cleveland in 2000. And at that time, the males who had been doing brises this one retired, and Rabbi Shur retired, and I don't remember who else was doing brisim at the time, also retired. Yeah, there were a couple of rabbis who were not doing it, or there were males who were not doing it anymore. Anyway, my husband was the only male in town, literally, conservative, reform, Orthodox, any denomination, he was the it. So he was doing all these brises for young families, and as he was meeting young families, he was inviting them if they wanted to participate in Torah study. So we would just be like sitting around somebody's living room, sharing, Torah study and whatever. And we didn't know if it was going to grow into something bigger or not. We just felt like we're putting out our energies and seeing what happens. During this time, my father-in-law, who is a very gregarious, friendly, he's a great guy, he was sitting on a plane. He travels a lot for work in the Shmata business. And he was sitting on a plane, and he's sitting next to this guy. And you know how people sometimes confide in total strangers on a plane? So he's sitting next to this guy, and my father-in-law, who's very friendly, says, "Jake Koval, what's your name?" So this guy says, "Nice to meet you, John Herman." Any of you know John Herman? Okay. So John Herman says to my father-in-law, "Let me ask you something. I see you're a religious guy." My father-in-law wears a large black yarmulke on his head. He says, "I see you're a religious guy. What's the meaning of life?" How long is this flight? So he says, "I've made my money when I was very young, and I don't know what the purpose is. What's the purpose? So now what do I do with myself?" So my father-in-law says to John Herman, "You need to meet my son." So he introduces John to my son, and John calls to his son, my husband, and John calls out my husband, and he says, "Your father says you're going to tell me the meaning of life." So my husband says, "Let me tell you something, John. Here's what you should do. Get together a few friends, and let's have a little, gathering in your house, and let's do a series on what's the meaning of life." That was really the genesis of JFX. We started doing Torah study in John's home. There were maybe 4 or 5 couples at the time. And I was joining along, and my husband and I were teaching all these ideas from when we had grown up and what we understood to be the purpose and the meaning of life, And at some point, one of the couples says to us, when we were going to Hebrew school, nobody taught it like this. And would you guys start a Hebrew school? Now, we had no idea how to start a Hebrew school, okay? But we were like, all we have to do is the next right thing. So what's the next right thing? So pause that for 1 second. So this is also a story of connecting the dots, right? Because if John Herman wouldn't have been on that plane sitting next to my father-in-law, and he hadn't felt so compelled to open up his heart to a total stranger, and my father-in-law wouldn't have been the friendly, gregarious guy who he is, and he was wearing a kippah on his head, which kind of transmitted to the world, "I'm a religious dude, ask me your questions." I don't think that's what he was intending to transmit. But, my husband, who looks very much like an Orthodox rabbi, for those of you who know what my husband looks like, he's 6'3". Okay, that part doesn't necessarily look so Jewish, but he's 6'3". He's got the salt and pepper, more salt and pepper beard. He's got the black yarmulke. People come over to him and say, I am not kidding you, the most fascinating things. Total strangers come over to him to talk about theology, religion, their existential angst, you name it, they confess to him. It's actually fascinating. So here you have all these factors. He's on a plane, he's feeling angst. My father-in-law is sitting, he's friendly and open, he's loudly Jewish, right? Unashamed to proclaim his Judaism to the world. And they have this conversation. And my father-in-law says, "You need to speak to my son," and he follows up, he does. And this guy, by the way, who said, "Will you teach our kids about Judaism?" So I'm telling you another story connecting the dots about him. And he said this story publicly, so I'm going to tell you his name. Maybe some of you know him, Randy Solganic. Any of you know the Solganic family? So Randy Solganic was one of our initial participants. And when when John Herman invited him to join this initial Torah study, He said, oh, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Let me just tell my wife. No, stop. That's not what he thought. He got a phone call from John Herman, and he thought to himself, that's a terrible idea. My wife will never do this. Or I will never do this. I don't remember now. It was a long time ago. And he tried to avoid the phone call for as long as he could. But he finally did get the call, and he said yes without consulting with his wife. And then he dragged her along, and eventually they became one of our founding members. So many dots to connect. If this wouldn't have happened, everything is like a game of dominoes. If this wouldn't have happened, then this wouldn't have happened. And if this wouldn't have happened, then this wouldn't have happened, right? And again, it's incumbent on us to look back at these things and to ask ourselves the questions like, what happened because of what, and how do I connect the dots to understand the wonder of my life? How did I get to be where I am today? How did I meet this person? How did I have this opportunity? How did I experience this moment, right? Everything happens for a reason. Everything is interconnected. So we launched JFX, and we've got this whole community of learners, and it feels amazing. And everything is going great. It's so exciting. People are so pumped. We start the Hebrew school, and the kids are loving it. And at the same time, we have a program for the parents, and we're really showing people that, learning about Judaism doesn't end with bar and bat mitzvah, or even with confirmation or going off to college, but rather that the parents are role modeling to the kids that you continue to study and you continue to learn. And then the other shoe dropped. And 9 years ago, when I was 42, so my husband is one of 8 kids. He's the oldest. I'm one of 7 kids, as I said. Well, yours, mine, and ours. We were 7 kids all together. We all grew up together because our father had passed away. My stepsister's mother had passed away, so there was no going back and forth. There was no other house to go to. We all grew up under one roof. And we, at that time, had 7 kids of our own. Girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. I know. I'm very organized. And things were going great. We were raising our kids the way we were raised and sending them to the Jewish day schools that we had gone to and all of this. And in 2016, that's when things started to shift and change. Was it 2014? Doesn't matter. And I really started to get a sense that not all of my kids were actually thriving in the ways I had thought they were thriving. Some of them were struggling emotionally, some of them were struggling religiously, some of them were struggling with their mental health. It took a long time for us to learn what exactly was going on with our kids, but as it turned out, all was not well in the Koval kingdom. And it was a very bitter pill to swallow to come to these realizations. And now here we are almost a decade out, and I see now some of my kids do have serious mental health struggles. There's addiction in my family, and 3 of our kids have decided not to be religious anymore. So as you can see, I am a very proudly religious woman, and we're running this whole congregation, right, where we're teaching people about Judaism and about embracing the traditions. And here are our kids, very loudly rejecting these messages and values that we have been teaching, not just to them, but to our whole community. And it was a very, very painful and shameful time in our lives where first of all, I very much felt like a fraud, because I felt like, how can I teach people about raising their kids or bringing Judaism into their homes when I myself am failing in my personal quest? And I'm not saying these feelings are true. I'm just saying I had them. And also, if you are very successful professionally, but your home life feels like it's crumbling, it's a very lonely place to be, because people look at you, and from what they know, you're very successful, and they think everything's fine, but there's this private shame eating away at you on the inside. And as a Rebbitzin, you know, it can feel lonely sometimes because you feel like you're supposed to be this role model and you don't necessarily, like, you need to have friends outside of your congregation that you can share these things with. So we're going through this whole, you know, metamorphosis, and at the time, another one of our kids was diagnosed with autism, which also felt like a very, very big blow to us. And it was a very, also like, what is going to be, and can this kid stay in school, or do we have to take him out? And, you know, so many like decisions to make as a mother and as a couple. Because when things like this happen, very often if there are two parents in the picture, they very often don't necessarily agree on how to navigate these situations and how to raise these kids. Or, you know, should you be more firm? Should you be more lax? Should you try to work within the existing system? Should you try to pull the kid out and work in another system? And so that was like a whole piece that we were navigating as well. For a long time, we did not have any Shabbat guests, which for us was a huge lifestyle change. We would have guests almost every single Friday night around our Shabbat table, but it just wasn't the right time. Our kids were falling apart. They needed us, and it was like we just told people, like, we felt uncomfortable telling people we're just not having any guests. For 2 years, we had no Shabbat guests at all. And we've really come very, very far since those early dark days. First of all, my husband and I very, very much prioritized our marriage through all of this. I give him the credit for that. And understanding that we have to be strong as a couple in order to navigate the challenges at home. But I've also come to realize something else. And that is, I thought that having problems with my kids made me a weaker leader. Because somehow it meant that I didn't figure it out or that I didn't do a good job. But what I've come to actually learn is that because I have had to navigate real, difficult, challenging, painful issues, and I've learned that I can talk about those issues and that I can be real and vulnerable about those issues, that gives people permission to understand that, no, I am not a perfect person, and my family is not perfect, no family is perfect, and that it's not about what happens to you, but rather about what you do with what happens to you, and that I also now have a power of empathy. Because before, I could only have sympathy. If I saw that somebody was going through something difficult, and I would say, oh, I feel so bad for them. But I didn't really feel the pain because I had no idea what it felt like. And now I do. And now I can have real empathy, that I understand when someone else is going through something grueling because I have been to that dark place. I didn't talk about it for 2 years. It was a secret. And now I feel so empowered when I see other people in that dark place where they feel like they can't talk about it. And I have a power of connection to my fellow human being in a way that I didn't previously. But there's more to it than that. 3 of our kids are not religious anymore. They have not decided that they're going to return to their Jewish, practice. They have not done so. Of our 3 kids who are not religious, one of them is very spiritual, actually. She has her own connection to God in her own way, and she prays in her own way. She is not Orthodox. She does not keep kosher. She does not observe Shabbat, but she's very, very spiritual, very pro-Israel. One of our kids is not particularly spiritual, pro-Palestinian, and that's a whole other situation. And then the third one is an atheist. And it's like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, And sometimes people say to me, well, what happened? I'm like, what happened to chocolate? What happened to vanilla? Or what happened to strawberry? Like, everyone's different. There's no one reason, And what I've come to understand is that it's my job as a parent, as a human being, as a Jew, as a woman, to try to do my best in this world with the things that God has put into my life. It's not my job to control the narrative, Did I want my father to die? No. Am I happy that it brought me to my husband? Yes. Did I want my husband to become a rabbi? No. Am I happy that it brought me to where I am today? Yes. Did I want to leave publishing and become a Rebbitzin? Hell no. Am I happy that I am where I am today? Yes. And I will tell you, am I happy that my kids struggled so much in their identity? No. Am I happy about who it has made me? Yes. And the way that this has also made me a better leader, educator, Rebbitzin, we always used to teach about a value called Ahavat Yisrael. Ahavat Yisrael means to love your fellow Jew. We are seeing now, post-October 7th, a huge resurgence in Jewish unity. Jews who formerly felt so disconnected from one another, we feel such a strong sense of allegiance, we have to stick together. Because guess what? We have a common enemy. We can't afford to be each other's enemy. And we're putting our differences aside, I hope not just temporarily, in order to bound ourselves together and face our common enemy, and to support one another, and to be together, and to be connected to one another. You know how many Jews I see wearing this necklace? Jews from all different stripes, all different affiliations, all different beliefs, all different denominations. Jews who voted differently in the last election. Yup, they're all wearing it. And we always used to teach this value to people. Love your fellow Jew, love your fellow Jew, love your fellow Jew. And now, in my very own nuclear family, are all those different types that I talked about. No, my kids are not cookie cutter. They didn't all turn out the same. You've got the Trump supporters, we've got the pro-gun, we've got the Biden, we've got the pro-Palestinian, we've got the Bernie Sanders, we've got them all. And I don't just have to preach Ahavat Yisrael, love your fellow Jew, because guess what? Sometimes it's much easier to love the stranger than the one that's in your house. But I have had to really dig deep and teach myself to love the fellow Jew that is my kid, who's different, or who's posting embarrassing things on Instagram. To love that Jew. And people in our community have told me that that has been more inspiring than anything else. Not that that's why I've done it. I've done it because I have to do it. I've done it because it's the right thing to do. I've done it because I want my family to be whole no matter what. And that is a microcosm of the Jewish people. We have to be whole no matter what. And it starts at home. So here I look back at my family's life, at all the things that brought me to where I am today, all the stories and all the connections and connecting all the dots and how did everything come to be the way it is, and all the stories and all the pawns moving around the chessboard. And here I am. This is my family, and it's not what I planned for myself. And it's not the script that I wrote. But guess what? If you don't have what you want, then you gotta want what you have. This is the family that I want. And this is the family that I have, and I'm gonna fill that bowl with goodness. And I'm gonna make it beautiful. Because you have to celebrate the good when you have it. And this is good. I have so many things to be grateful for. I have so many blessings in my life. I have so many opportunities for connection. I have so many opportunities to pump some goodness into the world. I can even use my painful stories to show other people that they are not alone and to give them permission to fill their bowls with goodness. So yes, I'm grateful for what I have. I'm grateful for the challenges that God has given me. And I'm even grateful for the pain because it has made me a better person. And when I look back at the me from a decade ago, I like the person I am today so much better. But I became her kicking and screaming. I kept saying, God, you picked the wrong girl. That's not my life. But God said, oh yes, sweetheart, that is your life. But I got you. You're going to be grateful one day for the life you have. And I am. And it's not that things have gotten better. It's that I have gotten better. And I know one day in 10 years or 20 years, I'm going to look back and have more stories to tell. And I'm going to have more Megillas to unroll, and more secrets to reveal, and more dots to connect. And so will you. So I really want to challenge you guys, when you leave here today, to think about that. You know, what are the dots in your life that you want to connect? In which way were you moved around the chessboard to get to exactly where you needed to be? What was the strategy? And what's the purpose? And what are you going to fill your bowl with? So thank you for listening. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I want to offer you the opportunity to ask. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a comment for you. When you talk about all your stories and your kids. Can't hear you. Hold it closer. Hold it closer? Okay. Okay. Think about, or did you think about, or could you think about the 3 kids who have perhaps in your mind deserted what you so believe in? Maybe they just became capable of independent thought on their own, and this is where it led them.
So I have a comment on your comment. So a number of years ago at our Passover Seder, and we've gone through different iterations of our Passover Seder, like some years all the kids come, and some years only some of the kids come. So one year, we have one of our kids who is not religious. His name is Avraham, actually. Abraham, we call him Avrami. And he was there at the Passover Seder, and part of the Haggadah is where you talk about how Abraham left his pagan home to follow God to the Promised Land. So I said to him, I said, you know, Avrami, I said, I want you to know, and he's the one who considers himself an atheist. He actually has a tattoo across his chest that says ungodly perceptions. So that's really fun. So I said to him, you know, Avrami, you're so much like your namesake, Abraham. Because we named him after Abraham, our patriarch, because that was the first time that my husband could do a bris for his own son, which is actually considered to be the ideal way to perform the mitzvah. It's not typically done that way because most fathers are not trained. But it was the first time he was able to do a bris for his own son, and it was the parsha. That week was the Torah portion of the mitzvah of bris. So we named our son Avraham after that. So one could look at that story and say, you could not be any more similar to Abraham. Abraham left his pagan roots to follow God to the Promised Land. Our son, so to speak, left the Promised Land. Okay, but that's not what I said, and that's not what I think. I said to him, you know what, Avrami, I'm so proud of you. He said, why are you so proud of me? I said, because your namesake, Abraham, spent the first 75 years of his life, before God said to him, Lech Lecha, follow me to the Promised Land, he spent 75 of his years seeking for the truth. And he looked for this, and he looked for that, and he looked at this ideology, and he looked at that ideology, and he ended up with the concept of one God. I said, you too are a truth seeker. And you too are looking for the truth. And I want you to never stop looking for the truth. And you're so much like your namesake, and I'm so proud of you. So it is a choice that I get to make, whether I am going to identify my kid's journey in a positive light or in a negative light. And I'll just add one more piece before we move on. My son, who is pro-Palestinian and has been posting all this content on social media, I said to him, you know, his name is Moshe. He's named after my father. I said, you know, Moshe, I'm so proud of you. He goes, we were having this whole conversation about Israel, and, you know, we decided that we weren't going to get into it because, like, I wasn't going to change his mind and he wasn't going to change my mind. But I said, I want you to know I'm so proud of you. He goes, why? I said, because when I look at your posts, what I see is compassion for your fellow human being. I said, now you and I will disagree on how to apply that compassion, but I see you living the value of compassion. And he's a huge animal rights activist, and I said, I see you applying that same compassion to animals. And that means you have a compassion for those who are more vulnerable and defenseless than you, and that is a beautiful value, and I'm proud of you. So again, it's my choice, as you said, if I am going to see those journeys positively or negatively, and I've had to work to come to this attitude. But that's what I'm proudest of most.
Hi, I loved your speech.
Thank
Loved
you.
everything.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I have out of what you just said, and what I believe in myself, is I think what you're faced with, and everyone is, that either you are going to change yourself on how you're going to accept it and how you're going to handle it with people, other people, family or friends or workplace. If you don't change yourself and try to get along with what you're going to have, you're never going to have. You're either going to leave it, you're either going to walk away from it, and I've learned it. It took me a long time to learn that, but I think all of us could probably learn a lot from what you said, and think about it, because it's how you're going to accept what you're given. And if you don't accept it and try to work it out, you're just not going to have anything to look at the end.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. It's so true. And then a person could spend their whole lives resisting what is, and it's not going to change. And it's such a waste of time and mental energy.
It's true.
So I so agree with what you said.
So that last one, I have a quick way that I say it. Change me, bless them. But I really appreciate your reminder that, I may not understand the journey, but God didn't forsake me. God brought me here, and whether I like it or not, whether I'm going to scream or not, it continues to move on, and it's my choice to go with it or keep screaming and kicking.
Yeah, that's very true. And I do have to share, since I've shared some difficult parts of our family, that 2 years ago our daughter got married. Our son is also married, thank God. Our daughter got married. And 6 months ago, she gave birth to our very first grandson. And they live a half a mile from our house. And he's named after my dad as well, this little baby. So I said to her, you literally do not have to do another right thing in your whole entire life. You live near us, you had our grandkid, you named him after my father, done. So there's also tremendous joy and tremendous nachas. And this little baby has been a tremendous unifying force in our family. One thing everybody agrees upon is that he is the cutest human in the universe. So thank God, that's a tremendous blessing.
I just want to thank you for all of the wisdom and all of the honesty that you came and spoke about today. Your sense of reality is awesome, and I really appreciated your idea of community and of unity amongst all of Jewish people. It was just very heartening, and your talk really touched me, as all the things that you say always do. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have here your book. If anyone would like to read more, what is a good way for them to get your book?
Yes, so this is actually my second book. My first book is called Conversations with God, Prayers for Jewish Women, and it's a contemporary language prayer book. It has some formal prayers and informal prayers. This one is soul construction, and it's about improving your character through different character traits. Both of them are on Amazon. I think Frank's Hebrew Bookstore also has them both, and I have plenty at my house. So, actually, Conversations with God is out of print. We're going through another printing, but I have them in my house. This one is available on Amazon.
I think I got this on Amazon. Is that where I got this? Yeah.
And I wrote a third book, which is in the works. It's right now in the editorial process. It's going to be called Soul Purpose, S-O-U-L. It's based on Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, which is a 2,000-year-old work, and it's a daily reader, so you can pick it up any day of the year, and there's a little snippet of wisdom with a little daily goal. So that, God willing, will be out in the fall.
And I guess I can help us close with another dot, that there is one of our Temple teens named Ruben wanted to be here today. And of course, the Temple teens are meeting in Akron today, so he couldn't. But he wanted to propose that if anyone was interested to help sponsor the bagels, on Sunday mornings, the teenagers sit with bagels that have been donated and they sell them. And that's the money that they raise to do things like their trip to Akron today. So if anyone is interested to help sponsor one, it's like $100, or if you want to help and do $50 or whatever, just call the Temple. They know how to do it at the front desk, and that might be a really lovely thing to help our teens be able to go and have fun and enjoy being Jewish together. So I promised him that I would share his message. So,
And thank you so much for having me, and thank you, and thank you, and thank you everybody for coming today.
She could do that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Here, walk me to the back. I'm going to check if I have a card.